Okay, so I'm going to just say welcome to our deep dive discussion today on February 17th, talking about connection questions. And so I'm going to start with sort of giving us a little bit of a background. Where did I, okay. And so when we talk about connection questions, this is just a social system map. This is the Now What map. I think some of you are on it. And so some of you have the context of this. And I'm going to just select Ben Roberts for a second, because he's got lots of connections that we can pick from. And when we're talking about connection questions, we're talking about in Kumu, you can draw lines between dots. I mean, that's sort of the whole point of this kind of mapping, is lines between dots, connecting dots. And sometimes you'll make maps where there's simply a line. Sometimes you'll make maps where it's a line that says more of this makes more of that. That's a system map kind of a line. And then in a social system map, you have the capacity or the ability to make lines that ask about some questions about the relationship from one person to another. So in Kumu, if your map is built in Kumu, I just clicked on a line between this person and Ben Roberts. I can't even see it at the moment, but it's in there and I clicked on it, and that's why it's showing up here in the side panel. And this person said that she has had generative interaction kind of relationship with Ben. So another way we can look at this in the map is to look at what we call the strength of connection. This is a way of filtering, and let me just unselect Ben now, or clear the focus on Ben, so we've got the whole map. And then we can use this to say, you know, who are the acquaintances in the network? So now we're just showing the links of the acquaintances, or who is collaborating in Now What, or who has done something called done major work together. So we can start to see how the network is connected and the various qualities of the relationship. So that's what we're talking about, is what's in that line. This is sometimes it can be confusing for people, but I'm not going to go into why. We'll just see if it emerges or if it's all really clear to you guys and you don't have that confusion. But what's in a line can show in the side panel. There can be lots of different information in that line. And so that's what we're looking at in the map. And then in sumApp, what we're doing is so this is how these lines were generated. This is Ben's profile. So I'm pretending to be Ben here, or this is his sumApp instance. And these are what we call the member tiles. And so Ben's job when he does this map, when he gives information, is to go through and look at all the people in the network and see which ones he knows in some way, and to open up the pop-up tile and say how he knows them. So whatever is answered by Ben in this pop-up tile about every individual is reflected in a line on the map. In Ben's map, or in a tier 1 or tier 2 sumApp account, you have basically, it's one question and it's a ranking question. So there's, you know, how do you know this person, basically, and you can edit and make the answers, those are editable, so you can make as many or as few, and you can frame them however you want, and you can tell your phone to stop talking. And I can't, threw it in the trash. But there's one. And so, and this one is usually, we call this the ranking question, because usually the way these are set up, in this instance, it's not precisely ranking, because Ben's trying to get at a couple different concepts in this one. But usually it goes from the weakest or the lightest kind of connection or relationship to a stronger connection, so that we can say, so that then we can reflect that in the lines in Kumu as make it easy to see, because we make darker and fatter lines. sort of our paradigm. Sometimes people are within a tier 2 account trying to sort of get at two different dynamics, which is what Ben's doing here. So then it makes it a little harder to be ranking. But this is the tier 1 and tier 2 interface. Now, and I just thought I'd show you. So this is a different kind of this is a tier 3 interface, but it's doing the same thing. So the reason I showed this one to you is just to say, this is another kind of, and I'll read them because it's kind of small. Have conversed or trained with this person, have collaborated with this person on unpaid projects, and have worked on paid network weaving projects with this person. So this is June Holly's network consultants map. And those are the questions that she asked. And so those look like this in the tiles. But the other thing to note, so if you've only been in a tier 2 account, you don't know what it looks like in a tier 3 account. So I'm showing, or 3 or 4, where we can have what we call multimodal connections. So this is an example where there's multimodal connections and we're taking full advantage of that. And this map actually is not done. It's sort of in a work in progress, but this is a social system map that we're making for this particular group. So for this community of practice of people who are learning social system mapping, we have this sumApp setup and a map in Kumu that Tim is working on so that we can use it to learn, to have an example to show, and to experiment with, you know, like, so I have all these ideas about connection questions and ways we could understand things better, but I can't force them onto our clients. And so this opportunity, this map or this particular project is an opportunity for us all to sort of think about what could we do and how do we engage with this, and to sort of practice and learn together. So in this one, as you can see, we've got the sort of the basic, an initial ranking question. And then we've got an open-ended text questions. Then we've got, you can select many answers. And then we've got some more questions. So in tiers 3 and 4, what you have is basically a whole nother survey with as many field types as we have in the person survey that can go into the connection questions. And those will look like, oh, and I haven't finished filling this out yet. So I'm going to say, this is me and Ryan, and I'll think harder about it in a minute. Come back to this. That's enough. All I have to say about you, Ryan. But so, so as you can see, there's more questions in the connection tiles. And then what that looks like in the map is, for instance, we have, I'm going to show you one that's got more. So there's more responses in the side panel, which makes for an opportunity to sort of cut, slice and dice the data in more ways than we otherwise do. So I think that's it for my giving context. And I just want to make sure that, because sometimes people have only seen a tier 2 account, or you know, they've only got one question to work with. And I just wanted to make sure that you understood all the possibilities before we start talking. And thank you, Kara, for putting that link in the side panel. So if you have not added yourself to that map, please feel free to do so. There will also be invitation in the follow-up email, but we do tend to, in the next couple of months, start really using that map a lot more, and to start using it for not just having a map, but experimenting with sense making and actually doing what we think maps are supposed to be useful for with it. So, okay, now let's go to, I'm going up the chat. And I'm thinking, since Emil is like totally brand new to us, and I know he's been busy because he's been pinging me here and there. I'd like to welcome him to the community and also give us all a chance to meet a new person by starting with Emil, and then Matthew. If I'm going to hope that okay, and I see Roy has one also. I'm going to hope that some of Emil's questions overlap with some of your questions, and that we get a bunch of people's questions answered, and then we'll try and fit in a second person and then just open it up to anybody's questions, depending.
Yeah, and maybe I should just also add, and thank you for that thing, just because I didn't, maybe I didn't listen properly, so there was only like for now just relating to the connection question, because then I think it would make sense, because I'm also curious in terms of the whole mapping, the difference between like individuals and also organizations, which is also interesting for me, as Ryan is mentioning. So that would also be fine. I had some other questions in different areas, so just to respect the topic of today.
Okay, that sounds, and just to let you know, and to let everybody else know, next week, so we're, if you look at Ben's map, and you have a link to that in the side panel or in the chat box, you could, if you go in and dig, you'll see that Ben's map is an example of somebody trying to use both organizations and persons in a map, and how you can do it. And if that's the only option you've got, you know, Ben has done a great job with that, as well as Drew Mackey, and Lennon has done a great job with that, but it's still clunky, because really organizations and humans are different elements, or different things, and the relationships between them are different. And so next week, well, in sumApp, we have now built the capacity to link an organization map and a person map, and have another set of question types that is person to organization. So next week at the same time, we'll be rolling that out and introducing it for the first time. So anybody who's interested in that should join us next week. And I appreciate your honoring the topic. So
Yeah,
jump in. Great, with your connection questions. Thanks. Go ahead, Emil.
Do you want me like to go ahead with that question?
Yeah, with the connection questions.
Yes, but so that was like basically what you just mentioned. I think it sounds like that will be answered on the next session, because that was in relation to.
Oh, that was your main question?
No, it was in other areas, but that was not relating to connection. So that's why I was saying that maybe to honor the agenda, like maybe I will seek that out somewhere else in another session. Okay.
So let's see. We've got Roy. Is that right? And Matthew. And I'm going to choose by the same logic. Let's choose Roy, because I'm less familiar with her than Matthew, and we'll deal with your connection questions, and then hopefully move to Matthew. And I'm not seeing Matthew on the things. People move around on this thing, and I get all disoriented.
I see him.
Is he there? Oh, there he is. Okay. I'm like, did he jump off already? I can't find his face. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I may be actually one step ahead of connection questions. I am in Southern Oregon, and I'm working with about 20 different community-based networks, and we bring them together as a network of networkers once a year to do some skill building and just kind of trading information. So this year in May, I was hoping to actually introduce sumApp and network mapping in particular. So I'm not really, what I want to do in advance of that meeting is create a map and have them be able to map themselves on it, so that what they see is a demonstration of their network connections. And I guess my basic question is, how do I do that?
How do you generate the map to start
Yeah.
with, so that you can add them?
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest that, so last week we had a how to get started, which is pretty related to that. And so I'm going to suggest that you go back to last week's recording.
Okay.
And, but this gives me an opportunity to throw out one just thought. One of the things that I've started, like in a lot of situations, people will have this sort of preconceived ideas of, okay, you know, a little, a medium, a lot, like how they want to frame that for a network. And I've started to say, really, what is it, like, what is your theory of change? What is it that you think that altering the relationships in this network is not so much what is it going to do, but how do they need to be altered to do that, so that we start to say, what is it we want to have change about these relationships? And then see if we can use that to inform how we word the questions.
Right, that is very helpful. Yeah.
Okay. So Matthew, since you're still here, I'm glad. Do you have connection questions?
Yeah, I guess I do. So we've just started working with Drew Mackey, who you know, who's sometimes on these kind of calls, I think. And,
yep.
And we had one kind of very initial workshop up in Glasgow in Scotland with some people that are keen to kind of pilot a map. And these are all people involved in healthcare improvement. So there's hundreds, well, thousands even, of these people around the UK. And we want to start doing a map of them. And I guess, so we're kind of at the stage of wanting to maybe come up with the best connection questions, preferably ones that will work around the rest of kind of England. As you know, I suppose we don't want some that are so specific to one group that then other people doing the map then sort of start saying, oh, we want this one as well. We will probably pilot it with with 3 or 4 kind of groups at once, really, rather than just one place. And I did see something that was useful to me, and you may be able to point me to another place with similar usefulness, was there's a toolkit called Planning a Social Network Analysis that some people called Digital Promise did, kind of for education, I think, a few years ago. And it was nice because it just gave a bunch of sample survey questions, like sets of them. And because kind of we're broadly wanting the map to be able to, we have a theory of change, and it has things about connection and collaboration and support and development, but broadly speaking, I guess we want to be able to show shifts over time in things around connection, communication, and collaborating for action. And I did like there was a set of just 4 questions from that the Digital Promise Toolkit, and it had, I know this person, I have talked and shared ideas with this person in the last 6 months. I've worked with this person in the past, but not in the last 6 months. And I have interacted regularly and collaborated with this person in the past 6 months. And I kind of like that because it had a real basic level of connection, but it also had something a little bit more around inspiration and ideas, another aspect. But then it's got something around working with them, and it also has a certain level of granularity that might be able to show changes, because, you know, we might want to timestamp the map so we can see if something's changed over a year or a conference or something. So I suppose I'm looking for the minimal number of questions to not scare people away, but that does manage to show kind of basic connections, something around ideas and inspiration, something around working with people. Having said that, we haven't got to that with the people we're working with. They may have other ideas as well, but I think it's a kind of, you know, does that make sense? You know, just getting the minimal number of questions to show a shift from just basic connection through to potential collaboration.
Just, so I know some of you have given a lot of thought to this. I want to hear what, like, Mary or Jim or others, just to what Matthew's saying.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary.
I think those questions are good. We've used them in the past, and since this session was called a deep dive, I started thinking before our session what that could be. And I'm just realizing within this session that there's different kinds of capital associated with people, and I'm one of those people that doesn't fit funding requisites. So if there was a map that recognized different kinds of capital associated with someone in terms of this person provided connections to other people or resources or learning or ideas, it would be helpful. But Probably not in your case, Matthew. Maybe that's a different situation.
That sounds, I mean, I'd love to know all those things, although it started to sound like quite a lot of questions. And for some reason, I don't know whether this is the influence of Drew, there's this feeling that we should use not many questions, but I don't know. I don't know how scared off people are if there's like 12 different types of connection questions or 8 or something, whereas instead of, 3 or 4. We haven't really tried, so just don't know.
Could I add something about that?
Mm-hmm.
So Christine put in the Network Weavers Facebook group map, she put in a second question, which was purely a description question. How do you know this person? And it's an open text field. And we had like 100 people on the map, and at least 50 of the connections, people put in a description about how they knew this person, which I thought was totally unexpected, that people would put the energy into describing their connection with someone else. So and which made the map incredibly rich. As you looked at it, you went, wow, these people know each other in these ways. And it was a rich conversation instead of, a data point. And so I was surprised at the level of willingness people were to talk about that. And that might be specifically the group of people and what was happening in that community. So I think understanding your community and how they're responding to the questions are really important. And I want to say one other thing. Ben's map, one of the questions that he asked in Ben's map, or one of his intentions, was he's just trying to connect people in this group of 300 people that he's convening from all places. And he wants to engage them in these conversations. And so the conversations were named, and he put that in the map. It's like, what conversations do you want to be involved in? So in other words, he had very specific goal there, and he had a specific relationship question that allowed him to visualize how the community was doing against that goal. So it goes back to what Christine was saying. What is it that you think is part of your theory of change? Identify that, map it.
I can share the scale that we're using and the one that I'm working on that I think would be very similar to what Matthew's talking about. But we just have a four level scale. And it's coexist, and that the definition of that is that entities are aware that they are engaged in related work. Communicate, entities are aware and share some information. Coordinate, entities are aware, share information, and participate in joint processes. And collaborate, entities are aware, share information, participate in joint processes, co-create policies and procedures, and share resources and ownership.
That's good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Seth, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think that Deanna or Dina and the scale that she just said and the one that Matthew originally proposed, or that he originally conveyed, are both really good in terms of a sense of a progressive relationship that people can easily place themselves in. I happen to like doing it in first person, so I think it's a little easier for people to relate to, like Matthew's was. But the comment I wanted to make was another factor in terms of the tolerance for people to fill in information is also whether it's a private map or a public map. Mm-hmm. If they think that their information is going to be publicly available to the world, there's naturally going to be some reticence to sharing too much information. Whereas if it's a private enterprise, a private network, private map, they may be a little bit more invested in spending more effort and time and being more self-disclosing in terms of what they want to share.
Yeah. I also we've done this long enough now that I've come to realize that there is no, like, I know, like for Drew, keep it simple is a mantra sort of, and don't let it get very complicated is a really high value, and it makes sense in the context where he's saying that. And at the same time, so I feel like there's always a tension between how deep can we go in this particular context and how simple do we need to be engaging people in this particular context. And so there isn't a one right answer. There's just this sort of continuum and a tension between them. There's always going to be like a reason to go further this way and a reason to go further that way. And, you know, hopefully we just sort of narrow the wobble, and really it depends a lot on the goals of the network overall. In some instances, it's a quick thing. It's a make connections thing. It's not a long-term, deep systemic change. We're really gonna, you know, like make a set of, build a set of relationships that can, you know, change the world, and that you know, is highly complex and is an ecosystem. If we're trying to build that really robust, resilient, enmeshed systemic change ecosystem, we need to know more than the 3 or the 4. And the more mature the network is, so that the more they're used to reading the maps and familiar with what does this mean, the more, my theory is, I don't have proof for this yet because I don't do a lot of research, but also because it's new, but my theory is that the more people understand and use the map, the more willing, and if it's a private map, the more willing they're gonna be to put time into actually giving it more information so that the whole network can use that information. But not at first, not in a huge group, not in a fairly transactional or temporal context. So to me, it just really depends on, you know, you can just sort of go from the very simple to get more and more complex over time, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And you can get more of that willingness the more you do sense making, and the more you train your network, and the more you actually embed your network into the ongoing decision making and thinking and sense making of your network. And if you don't use it that way, you're not going to get a whole lot of interaction with deeper questions. So, and then I'm having a hard time sort of following the chat. I have a feeling someone wanted to share something, a question or a situation that went past. And so if you put something in there a little while ago, no,
Question anyway, if there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was just yeah, so just very short. So we're basically working on creating a tool, or like where like the social systemic mapping is a part of the tool set, and it's basically trying to connect in a very systemic way, like NGOs and grassroots movements, and also the private sector, to begin with here on a local level in Denmark, and then trying to expand if it makes sense. Where we are right now is we actually already have 2 sort of physical networks. One is in Aarhus, where there's like 35 organizations working with everything from sustainable transport to food waste and so on, where we are building a prototype with them, trying to map like actually how they can use each other. And then there's the second one where I have a question, which is there's an organization called the Green Student Movement in Denmark, and basically they are trying to they're using a lot of energy on actually trying to reach out to other green student movements in Europe to kind of create a coalitions to go together as a part of COP26 in Glasgow to do like green political lobbyism. So they have a challenge of like, they don't really know basically who are the other organizations on a European level. And so we're sort of working with them and trying to, maybe we cannot offer them a map with all the rest movements in Europe because we haven't started yet, but we can maybe help them to create a social system map as a part of, I'm thinking as a way to organize basically themselves. So like if they find someone in Berlin who is willing to or working on, for example, also going to the COP26, they can start to basically create their profiles and map, and then they can invite other people in. Mm-hmm. So my question is that the connection part is as a way to kind of map who is potentially willing to collaborate on going to COP26 to put political pressure on a green agenda. Should it either be that there's a connection question that kind of link them together, where Is it basically like, for example, okay, we collaborate, or should it be more in the survey where there should be maybe coalition, and then you can basically create, like maybe type in COP26, and then everyone who is part of or willing to work in that like ticks that off basically. Because one is like more explorative and the other one is more connecting on the same sort of dots. Does my question make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just briefly, this is a place where it's easy to get, so the way I distinguish what you're talking about is there are like, so what you're asking is basically, where should the question go? Should it go in the survey about individuals, or should it go in the survey about relationships between people?
Yeah.
And what can be very confusing is that if we think about connections, meaning being like you and I are connected because we're both into mapping, then like that's where people will think that's a relationship question, but really it's about me and it's about you. Like I'm into mapping and you're into mapping. We don't necessarily know each other at all. We don't necessarily, so I think of those as potential connections.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we live on the same block, so we could well know each other and we probably ought to. And so it would be great for us to identify that, or we're, you know, both into, you know, a very specific kind of whatever. That's a potential question, as opposed, or a potential relationship as opposed to an actual relationship where I say, yes, I do know you, and here's how I know you. And you would probably say, yes, I do know her, and here's how. So if it's literally about what's between us, that we know is between us, it's a connection question. If it's about what could be between us, or what should be between us, or what's a potential between us, then it's actually about us, each as individuals. So it should go in the survey question.
So it's kind of like interaction. So if there's been an action, you can talk about a relation or connection. And if it's more about what you have in common, it's more in the survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does get a little mushy if you start talking about actions. So like, you know, we worked on a particular action together and you want to see that piece too, but that's another way you can use the organization piece, the linkage. So if it's more like an ongoing project or a campaign that isn't literally an organization, but it's a collective of people who work together and they have different relationships to it, you can use the organization link or a project. You can make that be a project and then link up the two, but that's a little
and how would you create that project? Would that be like basically doing the survey and then creating it as a project instead of like, let's say an organization?
It would be, so we'll talk about that next week, but you would have two surveys, one for persons and one for activities or projects or initiatives. And then you would have actually 3 relationship surveys, one for person to person, one for initiative to initiative, and one for person to initiative.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
It's complicated, but there is a real good logic underlying all that. But so we have 5 minutes. I want to just see if there's if anyone has like a really burning thing they didn't get to and they're not going to stick around for the extra half an hour in which we could unpack it. So if there's anyone who's sitting on something they just are going to be annoyed if they didn't get to address in the next 3 minutes, I want to make space for that. I'm not seeing anybody looking agitated or waving their hands.
We probably won't be annoyed.
Well, okay, maybe annoyed was too strong a word. I like to say strong words. Well, they'll feel like there's something missing or space in their concerns that didn't get touched on. Does anybody have that sort of a feeling? Okay. So then let's do this. Let's do a quick go around and let's just make it popcorn style so that, okay, wait, make sure there's nothing else. We just want to touch base on, hang on. Okay, want to make sure you know that there's lots more help. There were links in the chat and you can be in our Slack, and We've also added channels to the Slack for each of the monthly sessions. So there's a channel for a deep dive. So if there's more you wanted to say to somebody that was here today, or that you see in one of these, you can go in there and further that chat there in Slack. And there will be links to everything in an email following up. Okay, so there's more info. Again, if you want to stick around an extra half an hour, feel free to do that. And before we close, let's do a popcorn style of one thing, make it like a brief sentence that you're taking away from this session. And we'll just go in whatever order you feel like speaking, but make a space between if you can. And
I think it's the most popular of topics.
What?
It's the most popular of topics. Everybody has a lot of questions around it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm excited about a community of people thinking about it together. This is just so much richer and such a cutting edge to work with.
I think that Christine summed up a really good kind of heuristic for this in the what is it that we want to change as a result of this network, and setting up these questions to really push that needle, so that as you move down these questions, if you were retaking this survey, it would show progress towards what your organization or your network's trying to achieve.
I have I've taken one important distinction here between the potential relationships and actual relationships, and this is definitely going to impact my thinking about this.
For me, as a beginner, it's quite worthwhile to just sit with you, even without own questions. So.
I think Ryan pretty much borrowed the question I was going to put, how do we really see the relationships changing? So I don't have anything to add to what Ryan said a minute or two ago.
I think I just, I'm taking away a couple of different resources that people mentioned in the chat, the toolkit and that other book. And it's always a pleasure to get more resources that I wasn't aware of.
For me, I'm also taking away some additional thinking and perspectives about connection questions and how to really tie them in to visualize how people are related. And the reality of relationships is also maybe more complex than a few simple options, but trying to kind of capture that, and also adjusting the connection questions so they fit really well with the intentions or goals of the network map, and can support all of the members to implement those more, whether that be collaboration or local groups or meetings or whatever some of these things are. I think that's one of my key takeaways. Thanks.
I also liked some of the resources that were shared and appreciate that from everyone. And I'm constantly surprised and reinforced that the questions that people are coming up with and the problems or issues that people are confronting are so similar to the ones that I'm confronting. We're all asking many of the same questions or similar enough questions that whether we're dealing with a local network or a global network, the same sorts of things come up. So I appreciate that.
I just want to point out it's a minute after the hour by my clock, and if you're jumping off and you want to say one thing, let's do that. Or if you've already said something and you want to jump off, I just want to not drag people past their time frames if they're uncomfortable with that. So. Yeah,
I might need to head into another meeting in a bit, but I take with me from this meeting. So I've been watching you all on YouTube for a while, so it's a privilege to be online. But I take with me like the huge amount of knowledge accumulated in this network here with you guys, and I think more importantly, at least for me, like I don't have any idea of who you are, but there seems to be kind of an underlying really a wish of using it in a really positive way, which so the passion that is kind of lying underneath it, which for me is something that matters a lot. because as any technology is at nuclear, you know, you can use it in a good and a bad way. And it seems like this is a space to use it in a good way. So that means a lot. Appreciate it.
Thanks for seeing that. And David and Megan, I'm concerned about you because we've not heard from either of you. And I know you might need to jump off, but I just want to say,
it's okay. This is my first time here with you guys, so I have been like exploring where are you working with and all of this, and I have been found this really great. I am also sending a message that I build a map, a system map to a system to map all the sustainable initiatives. So I hope you can get into there and tell me what do you think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christine.
Megan.
I'll just say really quick that as someone who's really new to all of this, just sitting and listening has also been really helpful. So thank you for that. And Deanna, if that 4-level scale that you said could be shared somewhere, I would really appreciate it. So thank you.
We can have, Kara can pull them out of the recording and put them in as a summary in the session recording page in our help desk. Okay, I think everybody didn't get to say their thing, but I'm gonna say it's 11:03. So all of those who need to jump off, thank you so much for joining us, and we'd love to see you again and hope you come back and hope you contribute your own experiences and learning and thinking to the community. And have a wonderful rest of whatever's left of your day, wherever you are. And again, if you want to stick around, just don't jump off. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. See you.
I just put a link to a Google Doc that has the image of that we're using for the spectrum of collaboration.
Great. Thank you so much. Mary, you didn't get to say anything, I noticed. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just thinking, I think from doing the Network Thinking Academy of changing how we work is really important. So I'm wondering how much the questions, the normal questions we ask are sort of related to our old story or way of looking at things. And how does that need to shift to create the world we want to see?
Yeah.
So, I'm just thinking about it.
Yeah. I think I just want to say about Mary, I've known Mary for quite a while. We don't see each other or talk a lot, but when we do, she always thinks really like so deeply, it's almost hard to articulate. But if you listen very carefully to what she's trying to get at, it's always like super generative and super like pushing the boundaries. And so I really appreciate when you contribute, Mary. So just want to say that.
Yeah, I think your continuum from simple to complex really handles, it's like a both and. It's just what is the purpose of the map, and certainly from working with Ryan, there are situations where you want to keep it simple, but when it gets too simple in other situations, it's not useful either in terms of more connection or generative work. Yeah.
Yeah, I just to add to that, and then I'll stop talking. I feel like one of the things that we're trying to do with social system mapping is to sort of cure our culture of its addiction to simplicity and enable us to tolerate more complexity and more ambiguity, and to begin to see learn how to see patterns instead of get lost in too much detail, like to learn how to zoom out into the big picture and zoom into the detail, and to learn how to have a skill set of that. I feel like as a culture, we're not very good at that. And that's a big cause of our problems, is just reducing and simplifying. We all know that that's part of the problem, but we still treat each other as if we're not capable of thinking, like, if no offense to Drew whatsoever, because it's a tension, and I'm always at the far side of this tension, and I know that most of the time I'm wrong. I'm like making it impossible because I want it to be complex, but Drew is sort of at the other side of this tension, which is keep it simple so that people will engage, and so that they can engage. And I feel like the tension is not even so much, it's about the whole thing. And to me, there's more potential in a more complex map if people can engage with it. But part of it is just to say, it's not simple, and let's quit pretending it's simple, and let's just let it be messy. Let's just go into the complexity and help each other learn how to make sense in there, rather than continually distill everything down into bite-sized pieces. I just feel like there's a way, and I'm saying this way too strong because I tend to say things strongly, but I feel like there's a way we're infantilizing each other all the time by keeping it so simple. And we could just trust a little bit in our capacity to kind of, adapt a little bit and get our bearings in something that isn't simple. And so that's that's sort of like my push. And I know I go way to the far side of that, like way beyond what's necessarily helpful in any given context. But I feel like that's part of the point of social system mapping, is to help us have a tool to engage with that in an applied way, in a real context that is meaningful to each of us, so it actually matters, and I can have the motivation to work through that little bit of, whoa, I'm just—
Christine, just to add on to that a little bit, I like that idea. I think that one of the things as a consultant that we often get hung up on is producing a finished product to a client. And I think that this is one of those places where kind of rapid prototyping, reviewing, looking at things a lot of times, working with it. And I think importantly, and Mary and I have been able to work this way because she's thinking about this and working the technology as well, is that getting the capacity within the group that's actually working on this to play around inside of Kumu, to really to filter things in different ways, I end up spending a lot of my time trying to show different ways to show the data, which is useful, but there's this kind of like, if you can get in and really poke at what the map is doing, that's where you can get more people involved in that sense-making piece of it. And I think that's it. I guess to kind of wrap that up in a ball, it's like not focusing so much on having the finished, polished product, especially early on, and building enough time to have that messy interim. We have the data in the map, and you can poke at it kind of version.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point, Ryan. And it really has 2 points to it. One is the finished versus the ongoing map, and the other is the map that is being presented by the creator versus the interactive map that you can really engage with and play with.
Yeah.
And I find it very challenging to have people feel safe enough to just jump into the map and play with it, even though I try and create filters that are as friendly as possible and explain how to use them. But people often don't just dive in, and maybe they're afraid they're going to break it or whatever. But I do think it's really good for people to be able to play with a map. And in fact, I think it's actually okay for people to go into the coding if they don't have permission to actually save it, that they can actually play with that if they're interested in it.
Yeah.
Can I also add something?
Mm-hmm.
A question, because I totally relate to also what you started, Christine, because we also trying to work together with so we're basically in a non-profit or NGO, so we are also wanting to work together with we've been contacted by the Nordic Council of Ministers and other sort of bigger public stakeholders, and I totally relate to the I mean, the classical thinking of, yeah, let's do like a minimum viable product, a quick prototype, and like just boil it down to just like targeting one type of key player, and then you build on from there. And I've always like just had this feeling on my own of like kind of feeling like you're cutting off like the edges of the diamond. So I'm really happy that there's other people relating to this. So my question is, so there's always, I think there's two, which is always dangerous to have two questions, but I think what one of them is then like, you know, what is like, where is like the sweet spot of presenting something that is complex, but also as Seth is mentioning, that is not like too far away that people are not engaging with it, so it's not actually being used. Finding that sweet spot. And then I have like a more concrete question, which I like your opinion on, which is like, how do you also measure like the value that is being created on these maps? Because sometimes I feel like if we are able to kind of also in a clear way demonstrate like the value and the benefit from actually embracing the complexity, at least for us to be able to work together and to go into collaboration with bigger players like the Nordic Council Ministers supporting this work would be easier. So I'm not sure if that's like how many connections are being made or how many projects are being created, or but do you have any experience on how can you actually measure like the value that is being created inside such a network?
So so I'm going to go to your first question first, which is so part of like what Ryan was just talking about, what we're all sort of alluding to, or and Seth is talking about, is the more we're able to sense make, like teach people how to sense make with the map and engage with the map, the more generative the map can be, and the more we can. So that sense making piece is like totally not like, I don't know how to do that any more than anybody else does. There are certain people that I have sort of intense conversations with, and we do experiments, and that Sarah Shanahan is one. And so so that's a piece that we all like need to learn together. And I'm hoping that we, as these deep dives proceed, that we'll get more and more into what did you do to engage them, and how did, you know, in the experiments that we try to get through this barrier of the, you know, the needing to keep it simple so people will engage. But one of the things that Sarah and I did for the Network Thinking Academy that Mary just referred to was we broke the views out, and Sarah showed these views in, I think that was last week's on-ramp session. She shared that map, and we broke the views out into a simple directory so that people can start in a really simple place, and then the views got a little bit more and a little bit more complex, so that we, like, to me, I just want to see everything on the map, all the filters. I just want to be able to jump in and fiddle, right? But we just had this aha moment last fall, Tim and I and Sarah, about how, but that we know that scares everybody and it turns their brains off, and then their lizard brains have checked in, and then they can't figure anything out, and they just get frustrated and lost. So we break it down, and we make the beginning view, like the first view, just very simple, no differences in sizes, no connections whatsoever. It's just a directory, and then take it. And so you can see how Sarah presented that. And that is a way of starting, you know, like meeting them where they're at, you know, making, which I'm really always bad at. And you know, and having that simplicity that Drew is talking about, but then taking them consecutively into more and more complexity as they feel more comfortable with it. And one consultant that we work with just was at a week-long retreat, and so we had these consecutively more complex views, and every day she spent a little while just introducing the first view and encouraging them to play around with it and giving them some time to do that, and posing some questions like, who's working on X, or, you know, I don't remember what the questions were, but she just posed a couple questions and enabled people to go ask them in their laptops to go play and answer the questions for themselves. And then the next day she took it to the next more complicated view, and the next one, and the next one. So that's one of the ways that I'm seeing some of us begin to, and it's going to be slow. It's just going to be slow because it's a whole mental model shift. That's that question. And I just want to jump to the next one and then let other people jump in, which is seeing the value. You can, in sumApp, you can do time framing. So you can say, here's the network at time A, and it's got a couple, some loose connections, and then here's the network at time B, and there's more people, there's more dense, there's stronger connections. But so that's why you want to get the connection questions actually being about what it is you want to measure, and then you can just see the evolution of the network over time. And that foundations seem to be pretty psyched about that, frankly. So because they like to measure things. and you
also
can
experience that people like then continuously go back and change the connection.
Yes.
But you do that. You see that people do that.
Yes, so this is a paradigm to get people used to. This isn't a survey. This is a tool that we're going to ask you to go back into repeatedly, because everything is always changing. So this is part of that complexity versus simplicity. It's just like, let's throw this one-shot thing out the window and admit that things are going to keep changing, and we're going to do our best to follow the, to map the changes over time, because nothing, one snapshot doesn't tell us anything. And so we do, like, as we add more people, we remind people, okay, there's new people in there, please go back in. And we're going to start doing that with our map. So you'll start to experience that yourself. You'll get nudges from us, and you'll say, I already did that. And we'll be like, but actually we added some questions, or there's new people in there, so it'll only take you a minute, but please do it.
Christine, I haven't actually played a whole lot with sumApp. Can you export your data at certain times so you get a snapshot? Like, this is, before I did some push to try and deepen connections, then after I did this push to deepen the connections?
Yes, so we output the data. You can output it in a CSV file whenever you want. We also have a live JSON link that will just go straight into the map. And then the time frames also do that. So it's like, here's what the data looked like at time point A, and here's what the data look like at time point B. And then, so you'll have tags for that. And then in the map, you can actually put those into the map so that it's one data set, but it shows evolution over time. We built that in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you can show the different time, like save a different time slot in your map. And then you can go back, be like, that was how the map looked like in February 2020. And this was February 2019.
Yep.
Okay, nice.
Which is an incredible assessment tool, because if you've got the funder's question, the thing that they're trying to show that you're doing, and you've got that question on there, and you've got it at 4 different timestamps, and you can show that your interventions increase that. What a way to measure something that's been invisible for funders.
Yeah.
I was just going to share one activity that I've done with one map, and it was a Kumu map, so it wasn't being fed out of sumApp. It was it was being fed out of just some Google Sheets. But we happened to be able to have all the people who were involved in creating the map in a room together. So we did an activity called I Notice, I Wonder. So basically just had them in small groups, look at the map and just write down a few things, or discuss with each other a few things that they just noticed by looking at the map. And so they spent, 5-10 minutes talking about that. And then we had them think about and talk about the things that looking at the map made them wonder. So then we talked a little bit about that. And that was, this was just an introduction for them, but I think that that's a great way to start to get people to look at something like a social systems map, because it's a new way of looking at data for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they brought up really good and interesting things when they noticed and they wondered. And some of those I could address right away. And some of those were things that we just hadn't collected data about. And then we could deepen those conversations about, well, how would we know that? What else could we collect the data about so that we could answer that I wonder question? Yeah.
We've used what, so what, now what, but I think that in the context of mapping, I notice and I wonder, because I notice is kind of like what, and then I wonder is like, so what? But I think that I notice and I wonder are actually way better framings of those questions, because we've tried what, and people are like, it's just too open. The what is like somewhat too open. I love that. I wrote it down. We're taking it. We're using it. Thank you.
I actually have like a notice and wonder protocol somewhere. I can probably try to find it and get it to you.
That would be great. We would love that.
It's not mine. I stole it from somebody else. So
just building on what Jim.
Wait, Ryan, you're muted. You went the other way.
There we go. There we go. sorry, the different windows. Building on something that Jim said, about what funders like to see in these things that have been invisible. I think that even just, I mean, I think there could be an interesting brainstorm. I know I've had this going on in my head for a while of what are those things that have been invisible that social networks show in a different way. And the big one that we keep hearing in all of our topics, our firm works in a huge number of areas. And the thing that we keep hearing over and over again that people are really struggling with is really understanding equity in organizations, and you know, whether that be you know, social, racial, whatever way that people are defining that, it's a very difficult thing to measure progress on. I think that this tool set has a really unique insight into that, especially in existing organizations that are trying to bring more people to the center of a conversation and build from there. And looking at that over time is something that I don't think that any organization is able to visualize in any real way right now. And I'm still trying to figure out, we've got people working on that in other spheres, and I'm trying to figure out a way to kind of bake that into, you know, just what we're doing regularly as a measure of progress.
I think that's huge, Ryan. In the NetWeavers Facebook group, June really wants to instill cultural diversity as a cultural norm in that group. So it's a combination of putting attributes for identity on each person so that you can mark who you are, what your identity is. And then I'm not sure the relationship questions are any different. You know, you want to see like people coordinating, collaborating, you know, Deanna's list there or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a combination of identities and the attributes and the relational growth.
And I think the flagging feature, well, I mean, asking these questions, and I think Deanna and Mary and I had a brief conversation about questions that are difficult to ask people, but there's definitely an aspect of that. But I think that when you have a group that's really bought in, having the flagging feature on top of images gives a way to start seeing that. But I think more importantly, even if it's not like flagged out or visible on the ability to internally evaluate that network based on those. Maybe this is one of those public versus not public kinds of looks at it, is that we can actually, we need to have the questions, we need to have the data in order to sort that out over time and to see how we're having that actual impact. So it's worth thinking about, and I think that it comes into our conversations a lot because we're asking ourselves, like, how many questions are we going to ask people? How are we going to gauge what we're going to ask in terms of difficult questions? But I think that if there are, you know, just those equity, diversity, inclusion questions that we need to get data for, let's not be shy about asking them, even if we ask them in an optional way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the question that what we talked about in the small group was actually that, you know, relationships are really complicated, and sometimes you have negative relationships as well as positive relationships, but those negative relationship questions are really hard to ask in something like this. So in the specific example that I was using, I'm working on a food producers network or a food systems network map, and there are people in the network that they know about that actively avoid one another. Mm-hmm. And that is a type of relationship. Yeah. It's a different type of relationship than collaborating or coexisting, and whether or not you can ask that question, whether or not you have the sort of the privilege or the trust to ask those kinds of questions is really, it's not an easy answer. We're not asking that for this first round because it's the first time they've asked these questions, but I think it's important data to eventually loop back to when you've built some trust, to try and get a deeper understanding of, you know, who's avoiding one another in this network.
Yeah.
I just have a last comment, and then I really need to go. I think it's really interesting. I really like the space. Just as a comment to what we're talking about, like measuring value, and right now we're all talking a lot about like measuring that on the, for example, like the connection and continuous like ongoing updating. And I'm I mean, again, I'm quite new to this, so I'm just thinking like if you're connected to just say more than 10 people, it is like a lot of work to go through everyone to like then going like to select we are really good friends rather than we are good friends now, or whatever level that is. And I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be possible like sort of in the future to kind of, if you were able to, let's say if people like created projects together or was also able to communicate on the platform, that sort of like the data on the interactions could kind of be accumulated into actually automatically expanding that or broaden the thickness of the line. So I'm just a curious question also. Again, like I posed a question regarding communication on the sumApp. Yes, if that's like in the pipeline, also relating to that, or if it's been it's not going to be included on a purpose that I maybe don't know.
So that's a really good question, and it's a topic that comes up, and I mean, like we're sort of right now, sort of in this a little bit of an inflection point of having to make some decisions about direction, not so much about sumApp itself, but about a potential for partnering with other tools. Like I don't want to build a messaging program. I mean, there's a billion of them and I don't need to do that. But, if there's a way to have APIs that go back and forth that use other platforms that, connecting with other platforms. So I'm not saying it's not going to happen, and I'm not saying it is going to happen. And I have some sort of philosophical, like I get the value of that, and that would be much easier for people. And so, but philosophically, I have some feelings about, one is there's a really big, I mean, we're asking a simple set of questions. It's not giving a lot of dimensionality to a relationship, but nonetheless, there's a difference between inferring a relationship and somebody reporting directly. Like if I say, sometimes there are people that I have to deal with all day, every day, and I find them a total drag, and I wish I didn't have to, but I just have to. And it would could look, if we're making inferences based on behavior elsewhere, it might look just like I have this wonderful generative relationship with this person when I don't. So for me, a key principle of sumApp has to do with people telling their own, like representing themselves, and us not inferring behavior. Like we can infer things from Twitter behavior or Facebook behavior. There's lots of ways we can infer. And to me, like if we think about that systems thinking iceberg, everything that's out there, everything that you already do online is the tip of the iceberg. And I want to get at what's below the surface, like what you can only know by asking, and what can only be discovered by people learning to trust and be honest. So that's one thing, which doesn't mean that other thing isn't of value. It just means that's sort of where my principle lands is on the asking what's below the surface directly by Ryan. And then, but the other thing is, you know how in brain science, if you ask a question, it forces people to think about it. And that's one of the high values that I think that like I've had people come to an event and say, oh, your tool made me think about my relationships with all these people who are also coming to this event. And I actually reached out to some of them to have coffee. And if we just infer based on behavior, we'll miss that whole dynamic of asking people to think about their relationships. And asking people to think about their relationships feels to me like a crucial piece of our shifting the whole dynamic. If we find it, so like in REAMP, they say relationships are 80% of the work. And I'm like, and so if that's 80% of the work of a network is relationships, it's really too much to ask people to spend, 5 minutes a year updating like per relationship? It's like, so I'm just saying, yes, it's asking a lot. Yes, it's pushing the boundaries of what people are willing to do at this point in time. But if we engage with it to, as generatively as possible, I think that there's value in asking people to do that if it's an emerging thing, an evolving thing, and I just like to push in that direction. So I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Christine. Unfortunately, I have to go. I'm just kidding, but thank you so much.
Thanks. And I
Really
got out there.
appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks,
Asna,
guys. Just Jim?
No, just Asna, can you stay on 1 minute for your question?
Yes, I was actually listening one morning. Yeah.
You're asking Emil to stay on?
No, Asnet.
Okay.
Okay.
She's still here.
So my question is.
But I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we're out of time, and I think Christine was
Okay.
adjourning us. But I was just saying, if you wanted to stay on.
Yeah. I think I'd like to stay for a couple more minutes because a lot of it has been answered in indirect ways. But maps, depending on what the use is, after they mature, after a year, maybe you have some new insights that came through the users, through our use, whatever, and we need to refresh the questions. It's probably more for the survey and less for the types of connections. But people lose energy, and they get confused easily, as we just learned. How do we refresh the questions without losing the people and without losing the information that we had? And the really is how to keep the map alive as we want it to be, even though it's a snapshot in time. So I'm struggling with this because there are new questions that are coming up. There are new needs that are coming up, and constantly changing the map is confusing for people, and we cannot keep asking people to update it as we make the changes because they can barely come for the first one.
Jim, do you want to address that? Do you want me to address that?
I actually thought you were going in a little different direction, Osnet, so I'm sorry. I thought the question was, how do you actually make changes to the connections? But Osnet, I could talk offline with you about that, about how to manage the data that
So, this is not a question, this is not necessarily a technical question. Because I can see, I learned today about many ways that you can, with the prototyping and all that stuff, and telling people how things change and asking them to come back. But I'm thinking that sometimes things change very dramatically. Systems change, things move. We have new thinking about the whole thing, so we don't want to scrap it. We want to update it. Yep. So it's more of a communicating the intent, and whose intent is it anyway, and how do we refresh and update based on new insights that we have? And it's not a technical refreshment. I think this is a technical. It's more of a conceptual refreshment of what we have and what we need now compared to what we needed a year ago, or 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
So Jim, do you mind if I reply to that? I say this about just about everything over and over, but it really feels to me like the more engaged people are, if there needs to be a core of people who actually use the map for thinking and like having discussions. And the more that's the case, so the more there's sense making happening and the more engagement there is, the easier that's going to be, because then people themselves see a value in it. And the more it's a top down decision or an isolated decision maker making that, the less, ultimately, if people don't feel like there's something of value in this map, either that I experience directly or that I see indirectly by changes that happen or ways people use it, it's not gonna, it's always gonna be an uphill climb. And it's probably gonna be an uphill, or pushing a boulder uphill. It's probably gonna be that way for a while in any case, but it's all about engagement and people seeing a need to add that question. And if they don't see a need to add that question because they don't think that the system is moving, or they don't think the map is really a reflection of reality, you know, enough of a reflection or useful enough as a navigation tool, they're not going to. And I mean, to me, that's the most horrifying thing to have to say, because we built this tool, you know, to use for this purpose. And I keep telling people it's not going to happen. Like, you can't, but it's really big. But the point is, it's about the whole engagement process, which is what we're all learning together, and we're all grappling with and don't have answers to. But that's my theory of change is, yeah, but I don't know more than that myself in our experiments. That at least
it's reaffirming.
Yes, no one has an answer to this stuff. I mean, that if you're feeling like you're floundering, it's like, yeah, we all are. And we're all hoping that we can make a real difference if we keep pushing in this direction and teaching each other how to do that. But none of us has answers in that category. I mean, that's like the edge. So go experiment and come back and tell us what you learned. Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah. We good? Okay.
Good to go.
Thank you. Have a good week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.